Again, everybody, we're going to come back to the middle grounds again and again and again today, and honestly, through the rest of this class. The middle grounds are just a fascinating epicenter of Toledo's history. So, the middle grounds are where the rails meet the water, and it's critical for the transportation beginnings of industrial modern Toledo. So, we needed to go back to the canal age for just a little bit. First of all, canals were really expensive to build, and they were really expensive to maintain. Here is where the canal came through South Toledo. So, Glendale Avenue had a bridge over the canal. This is exactly where the Anthony Wayne Trail is today. But you can kind of see the water of the canal there, making a loop. OLPH is over here, so this would be like looking south, right? Like if you were coming from Maumee, you'd be coming this way, curving the trail. Glendale is right there with all those little shops that are there. I can't even think what they're called right now. But anyways, the canal was through there. So why were the canals so expensive to build? Well, number one, they're built in the 1830s before there's power equipment. So it's being done by hand, by people. And you need a lot of people to dig a really big ditch that goes like 700 miles, okay? You need a lot of people to do this work. It's a lot of earth moving. It's a lot of people. And it's really expensive to do. Because not only did they have to pay them, they had to feed them and give them a place to live and some clothes on their back. It was really expensive to dig a canal. Now, once it's built, you go, okay, well, it's done, right? It's over. No. Here's the next big problem. Canals often got eroded, okay? So the dirt on the sides would get eroded by the waves of the boats going by. Now, keep in mind, in the beginning, those boats were going by at a whopping 4 miles an hour on a good day, okay? But it still provided enough waves that it eroded the shoreline, and then that dirt would go in the water. That would make the canal less deep. They'd have to drain, dig again, redo, rinse, repeat, lather, over and over and over again. In some places, the canal was built up with levees on the sides, and those levees would spring leaks. And now you got to patch the leaks in the canal. Canals took a lot of work. They took so much work, as we'll talk about in a little bit, that they kept dropping the speed limit on the canal to the point where the speed limit on the canal was 2 miles an hour. So now you've got this, what's supposed to be amazing network of transportation, but it's slowed down to 2 miles an hour so you don't have as much erosion on the sides. So the canals, other than the Erie Canal in New York, never really paid for themselves. They never turned a profit. And they were critically important for like a hot second in American history. But canals in the United States were victims of terrible timing. Back in Europe, canals had been in use for many years. They paid for themselves, no problem. Here in the United States, we get started building them too late. By the time the canal opens in 1845, remember, they started planning it out 10 years earlier. Between the planning and the construction of the canal, a brand new transportation method had come around that was faster and cheaper, easier to make than canals, and that was the railroad. The first railroad that ran out of Toledo comes in 1836. It made it up to a speed of 20 miles an hour. And any of you who have driven in the school zone know that 20 miles an hour seems like you're just a turtle when you're in an automobile, but back then, 20 miles an hour compared to 2 miles an hour is significantly faster. This line on the Erie and Kalamazoo Railroad ran between Adrian and Toledo by the fall of 36. It ran on these crazy-looking old steam engines where the guy stood outside, the engineer stood outside, the wood or the coal was held in this hopper, and then the people were in what looked like a stagecoach carriage pulled along. And you notice there was only one car. There wasn't a lot going on here. So the first one opens in 1836. Within 20 years, you've got railroads going everywhere out of Toledo. The Cleveland line opens in 1853. The Fort Wayne line opens in 1855. And not only do the railroads bring faster transportation, they bring instant communication. Because the telegraph lines for the Morse code, the Morse code telegraph lines that can send messages instantaneously between cities, those come with the railroad. Now, This is a big deal for a place like Toledo, okay? Because remember, the reason the canal came to Toledo was you could put stuff on ships then out to sea and to the rest of the world and all around the Great Lakes, or over the Erie Canal, which was still profitable. The railroad brings real opportunities for Toledo, Ohio. Now, Toledo made a decision to go to that place that I told you about at the very beginning of this movie, the Middle Grounds. They decided that we're going to run all of our railroad lines to the Middle Grounds, right where the canal docks were. So what was going to happen in Toledo, Ohio, that didn't happen in many other cities in America, canal boats, railroads, lake ships, all came together in exactly the same place. What you call this is a multimodal transportation node, or a multimodal transportation connection, where multiple modes of transportation meet up at the same place. Again, we talked earlier about how Toledo becomes a warehousing hub because of the canal boats and the ships. That's only going to get bigger now because of the railroads. So through the 1850s, they fill in the land at the Middle Grounds, which I'll show you on a satellite picture in a minute. And in 1856, they open up this amazing building here, which is roughly where the Owens Corning World Headquarters is today down in the Middle Grounds. And this building was called the Island House. And the Island House became Toledo's first train station. It was a train depot for passengers, where passengers could wait inside for a train, then get on the train and go around the world. It was a hotel. The upper floors had hotel rooms. There was a ballroom. There were luggage and baggage areas, and areas for loading goods on and off trains. The Island House was really the heart of the city for about 50 years. And you can see here, so this is Swan Creek, which, as you remember, is the extension of the canal. Here's the Island House. The rails come right in there, and then the river is just past it, right? The river is just out to the other side here. So this is that Swan Creek area. This was Ford Industry back in the 1800s. It was that French trading post in the 1600s. We don't even know how many different native nations occupied this territory. This place where Swan Creek meets the river is probably the most important territory in the city of Toledo back then. So let's go to a satellite view real quick to take a better look at the Middle Grounds and how it got filled in and what it is when I was a kid and what it is today. All right, so we're back here with my old friend Google Earth, and this is a satellite image of Toledo from 1993. Now, one of the problems is the 3D buildings are already overlaid on it, so you're going to be able to see where the buildings are today, but I want you to notice the black and white stuff more than the buildings. So, here's Swan Creek, here's the river, I-75, Route 2 and the Anthony Wayne Bridge. Down here is the Middle Grounds. Now, everything you're looking at here, basically from the bend in the river at I-75, all the way along here, this is where the river used to run. The river used to be very wide at this bend in the river. And then the Middle Grounds basically had a very small peninsula that went out, like a little causeway that went out about here, which is behind today's train station. If you know where the train station is down on Emerald Avenue, there was a little peninsula that went out there, a little connector. And then this was an island. It was a very narrow island, was what the Middle Grounds are today. But, as I mentioned earlier in here, they start filling in the Middle Grounds. They start filling in. This was all basically a swamp. It wasn't land. It was like swamp and river water and stuff all together. And they start filling it in. So where the Anderson's docks are and all that stuff, near I-75 on the south end, that is all stuff that used to be essentially part of the river and swamp. And they filled it in to make it solid land. Where the railroad station is today is stuff that was filled in and they made solid land. All of this part here, which as we'll talk about in a little bit, is that Middle Grounds Metro Park today, was all filled in and reclaimed from the water, all the way along up to here. Okay, so Swan Creek used to come down, and then this island was much skinnier. Now, back in the 90s, you see that this was basically a great big field, that the railroad tracks came all the way down here. And if I had satellite pictures from earlier, which I obviously don't, we would see the railroad tracks all coming right up here to the point of the middle grounds, okay? And again, if I flatten this out, you can kind of see what I'm talking about here, right? This is the OC headquarters is today located on this middle grounds. You guys all recognize that, I think, right? I'll flip it around, but I think everybody recognizes where I'm talking about right now. And the island house was out here. The island house was right out here where the rails in the canal came together on this side. And then up here was where the lake ships docked, and stuff could just get moved from the railroads, from the canal, over to the lake ships. And today, that is all the OC headquarters. Now, here's my razzle-dazzle stuff. You can watch this change through time. So by the time we get to 2000, the OC headquarters has been built. By today, we get it in living color. And you can kind of see exactly what we're talking about at the middle grounds. Canal boats came in here. Island house was out here. The railroads came in here. The lake ships docked over on this side. And of course, that middle grounds Metro Park is right over here. So here's the Anthony Wayne Bridge, and then Middle Grounds Metro Park is over here. And you can tell where the train lines used to come through, because this is still the, is it the Norfolk Southern yard? I can't remember. One of the big railroads has their yard come through here. And you can see where the trains used to go right through over to here. That was still all the train yards and whatnot. And if you are ever coming across the bridge, let me see if I can do this, you can see one of those great big warehouses. And I think you guys will recognize this one. Come on, Boyle. That when you come across the bridge, one of the things you see is the old cold storage warehouse. And of course, I'm not getting it right now. Let me see if I can do this just a little bit slicker. Yeah, right over here you can see Great Lakes Terminal Warehouse District. Guys, it's all down by the middle grounds. It's all by the baseball stadium. This is what made Toledo, Toledo. So, those warehouses like Great Lakes Terminal Storage, the warehouses created jobs. The railroad created jobs. Jobs working on the ships that came in and out of Toledo created jobs. And all of those new jobs make for population. So in 1835, right before the Toledo War, 1,900 people lived in Toledo. 1,900 people lived here. 15 years later, that's almost doubled to 3,820 people. And by the time we get to 1860, when Toledo is just like 15 years old, it's up to 1,300 or 13,000 people. So the population has like expanded by 800% in 15 years because of all these transportation jobs. Now, transportation jobs are going to lead to transportation construction or transportation manufacturing. And most people today, as you heard the other day, they think of Toledo as a Rust Belt city with factories that make things. We became a factory city because of transportation. In this city where so much transportation came together, companies built things as part of that transportation. So there were wagon companies, as we'll talk about later. If you live up by like Detroit and Monroe, Milburn Wagon Works were up there. And there was a whole neighborhood called Wagon Works that was people who worked at the Wagon Works factory making wagons. Canal boat construction happened on the south end. And some of those Irish ended up building canal boats after they had built the canal. Shipyards were located downtown and then across on the east side and going up towards Ironville, going upriver or downriver. Construction of transportation stuff, and again, think of it, what's our biggest factory today? The Jeep plant. Building stuff for transportation became a huge part of who Toledo is, a huge part of our identity from the very beginning because of the strategic nature of Toledo's location in the world. All of this growth starts driving services. When your city gets bigger, the people who live in that city need things from the city. They need lots of basic things that you don't even think about, but don't exist in small towns. So, the first cemetery opens in 1839, and that's Forest Cemetery that's out by Woodward High School. Toledo Public Schools forms in 1849, and we'll talk more about the history of the schools later. St. Vincent's Hospital opens in 1854, not too far from where it is today. Toledo Police Department forms in 1857. We're going to learn more about the PD's history later on in this class. City Light forms in 1857. The Toledo Lighting Company, to basically have street lights with gas lamps. So instead of street lights that are electric, you had street lights that were pipes that carried natural gas, and there was a person at night whose job was to be the lamplighter. And they went around and lit the lamps at night, basically ran the wicks up, lit the lamps, so there would be light at night on the streets. And municipal transit begins in 1862. We have our first streetcars in 1862. Those companies are the forerunners of what became TARTA today. Taking a look at this map from 1852, during the heyday of this kind of transportation revolution era. Here are the middle grounds. And again, you can see how it's an island, right? You see what I was talking about earlier in the map? The middle grounds were an island. Swan Creek comes out here, and then the river makes that big bend, and then all of this is swamp. All of that was water. But you can see the rails coming together here. Railroads coming from the west side came through the south end and out here. And then the railroads coming from the east came on a bridge across from the east side onto the middle grounds, where they could then continue out to the west. So everything comes together at the middle grounds. I keep saying it over and over and over again. One other thing I want you to see on this map. There's lots of other things I want you to see, but you might be able to follow this line right here. This is the canal coming in. This is the Anthony Wayne Trail. And you know how the trail, when you get downtown, makes that jog before it comes into town? That's the jog in the Anthony Wayne Trail when you come into downtown. And then the canal went right through town, right past the library, through the north end, and then continued out here. This is the Stickney estate. This is where the Stickneys lived, where Riverside Hospital was, and where the TPS headquarters is today. The canal went right behind there, and then went out to that town of Manhattan, out by Summit and Manhattan Boulevard. The other thing to notice here, one last thing to notice, is down here. You see that the east side has a different name. At this point, East Toledo was not part of Toledo. And what's funny here is that they have it misspelled. The east side was a town called Yandota. It had been laid out, it had streets, but they hadn't sold a lot of houses yet. And you can see those streets laid out, and you can even kind of see the little parcels to be sold out as homes. It was called Yandota, but on this map it's misspelled as Mendota. But Yandota was this town across the river that will eventually become part of Toledo. And of course, in my humble opinion, the best part of Toledo. So, guys, that's it. Thanks for sticking with me in this about transportation. I hope you've watched this a couple times. Everything I talk to you about is quizzable or testable. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time. And as always, be well.